Desperation, continuing section 3 of chapter 5. You were completely correct, Reverend Martin had said. It wasn't another voice you heard at the end, especially not the voice of God, except in the sense that God always speaks to us through our consciences. Secular people, David, believe that the conscience is only a kind of censor, a place where social sanctions are stored, but in fact, it is itself a kind of outsider, often guiding us to good solutions, even in situations far beyond our understanding. Do you follow me? I think so. You didn't know why it was wrong to take the credit for your friend's recovery, but you didn't need to. Satan tempted you as he tempted Moses, but in this case, you did what Moses didn't, or couldn't first understood, then withstood. What about Moses? What did he do? Reverend Martin told him a story of how, when the Israelites he'd led out of Egypt were thirsty, Moses had struck a stone with Aaron's staff and brought water gushing out of it. And when the Israelites asked to whom their thanks should be directed, Moses said they could thank him. Reverend Martin sipped from a teacup with "happy, joyous, and free" printed on the side as he told this story. But what was in the cup didn't exactly smell like tea to David. It smelled more like the whiskey his dad sometimes drank while watching the late news. Just one little misstep in a long, hard-working life in the service of the Lord, Reverend Martin said cheerfully. But God kept him out of the promised land for it. Joshua led him across the river. Nasty, ungrateful bunch that they were. This conversation had taken place on a Sunday afternoon in June. By then, the two of them had known each other for quite a while and grown comfortable with each other. David had fallen into the habit of going to church in the morning, then walking over to the Methodist parsonage on Sunday afternoon, and talking with Reverend Martin for an hour or so in his study. David looked forward to these meetings, and Jean Martin did too. He was immensely taken with the child, who seemed at one moment an ordinary boy, and at the next someone much older than his years. And there was something else. He believed that David Carver had been touched by God, and that God's touch might not yet have departed. He was fascinated with the story of Brian Ross, and by how what had happened to Brian had caused David, a perfect late 20th century religious illiterate, to seek answers, to seek God. He told his wife that David was the only honest convert he had ever seen, and that what had happened to David's friend was the only modern miracle he'd ever heard of that he could actually believe in. Brian had turned out fine and dandy except for a slight limp, and the doctor said even that might be gone in a year or so. Marvelous, Stella Martin replied. That will be a comfort to me and the baby. If your young friend says the wrong thing about his religious instruction, and you wind up in court facing child abuse charges, you have to be careful, Jean, and you're crazy to be drinking around him. I'm not drinking around him, Reverend Martin had replied, suddenly finding something interesting to look at out the window. At last he had returned his eyes to his wife. As to the other, the Lord is my shepherd. He went on seeing David on Sunday afternoons. He was not quite 30 himself, and discovering for the first time the pleasures of writing on a perfectly blank slate. He didn't quit mixing Seagrams with his tea, a Sunday afternoon tradition of long standing, but he left the study door open whenever he and David were together. The TV was always on during their conversations, always punched to mute and tuned to the various Sunday afternoon athletic contests. Soundless football when David first came to Reverend Martin, then soundless basketball, then soundless baseball. It was during a soundless baseball game between the Indians and the A's that David sat mulling over the story of Moses and the water from the rock. After a while, he looked up from the TV screen and said, "God isn't very forgiving, is he?" "Yes, indeed he is," Reverend Martin said, sounding a little surprised. "He has to be because he is so demanding." "But he's cruel too, isn't he?" Gene Martin hadn't hesitated. "Yes," he said, "God is cruel." "I have popcorn, David. Would you like me to make some?" Now he floated in the black, listening for Reverend Martin's cruel God, the one who had refused Moses' entry into Canaan because Moses had one single time claimed God's work as his own. Side note, I thought God didn't let him in because Moses didn't give Aaron credit for using his staff, or whoever the guy was. Let me see. Yeah, that Moses didn't give Aaron credit, it was his staff that he used. It didn't dawn on me until right now when they said it that he took credit for God's work. Anyway, end of side note. Because Moses had one single time claimed God's work as his own, the one who had used him in some fashion to save Brian Ross, the one who had then killed his sweet little sister, and put the rest of them in the hands of a giant lunatic who had the empty eyes of a coma patient. There were other voices in the dark place where he went when he prayed. He heard them frequently while he was there, usually distant, like the dim voices you sometimes heard in the background when you made a long-distance call, sometimes more clearly. Today, one of them was very clear indeed. "If you want to pray, pray to me," it said. "Why would you pray to a God who kills baby sisters? You'll never laugh at how funny she is again, or tickle her until she squeals, or pull her braids. She's dead, and you and your folks are in jail. When he comes back, the crazy cop, he'll probably kill all three of you, the others as well. This is what your God did, and really, what else would you expect from a God who kills baby sisters? He's as crazy as the cop when you get right down to cases. Yet you kneel before him. Come on, Davy, get a life, get a grip. Pray to me. At least I'm not crazy." He wasn't rocked by this voice, not very, anyway. He had heard it before, perhaps first wrapped inside that strong impulse to give his folks the impression that he had called Brian back from the deep reaches of his coma. He heard it more clearly, more personally, during his daily prayers, and this had troubled him. But when he told Reverend Martin about how that voice would sometimes cut in, as if it were on a telephone extension, Reverend Martin had only laughed. Like God, Satan tends to speak to us more clearly in our prayers and meditations, he said. It's when we're most open, most in touch with our pneuma. Pneuma, what's that? Spirit. The part of you that yearns to fulfill its God-made potential and be eternal. The part that God and Satan are squabbling over, even now. He had taught David a little mantra to use at such times, and he used it now. See in me, be in me, he thought, over and over again. He was waiting for the voice of the other to fade, but he also needed to get above the pain again. It kept coming back like cramps. Thinking about what had happened to Pi hurt so deep, and yes, he did resent God for letting the insane cop push her down those stairs. Resented, hell, hated. See in me, God, be in me, God. See in me, be in me. The voice of Satan, parentheses, if it was indeed him, David didn't know for sure, close parentheses, faded away, and for a while there was only the dark. Tell me what to do, God. Tell me what you want, and if it's your will that we should die here, help me not to waste time being mad or being scared or yelling for an explanation. Distant the howl of a coyote, then nothing. He waited, trying to stay open and still. There was nothing. At last he gave up and spoke the prayer-ending words that Reverend Martin had taught him, muttering them into his clasped hands. Lord, make me be useful to myself, and help me to remember that until I am, I can't be useful to others. Help me to remember that you are my creator. I am what you made, sometimes the thumb on your hand, sometimes the tongue in your mouth. Make me a vessel which is whole to your service. Thanks. Amen. He opened his eyes. As always, he first stared into the darkness in the center of his clasped hands. And as always, the first thing it reminded him of was an eye, a hole like an eye. Whose, though? God's? The devil's? Perhaps just his own? He stood up, turned slowly around, looked at his parents. They were looking back at him, Ellie amazed, Ralph grave. Well, thank heaven, his mother said. She gave him a chance to reply, and when he didn't, she asked, were you praying? You were down on your knees almost half an hour. I thought you must have gone to sleep. Were you praying? Yes. Do you do it all the time, or is this a special case? I do it 3 times a day, in the morning, at night, and once somewhere in the middle. The middle one I use to say thanks for the good things in my life and ask for help with the stuff I don't understand. He laughed, a small, nervous sound. There's always plenty of that. Is this a recent development, or have you been doing it since you started going to that church? She was still looking at him with a perplexity that made David feel self-conscious. Part of it was the black eye. She was developing a hell of a shiner from where the cop had hit her. But that wasn't all of it, or even most of it. She was looking at him as if she had never seen him before. He has been doing it since Brian's accident, Ralph said. He touched the swollen place over his left eye, winced, and dropped his hand again. He stared at David through 2 sets of bars, looking as self-conscious as David felt. I came upstairs to kiss you goodnight this one time. It was a few days after they let Brian go home, and I saw you down on your knees at the foot of your bed. At first I thought you might be, well, I don't know, doing something else. Then I heard some of what you were saying and understood. David smiled, feeling a blush heat his cheeks. That was pretty absurd under the circumstances, but there it was. I do it in my head now. I don't even move my lips. A couple of kids heard me mumbling to myself one day in study hall and thought I was going feeble. Maybe your father understands, but I don't, Ellen said. I talked to God, he said. This was embarrassing, but maybe if it was said once and right out straight, it wouldn't have to be said again. That's what praying is, talking to God. At first it feels like talking to yourself, but then it changes. Is that something you know for yourself, David, or is it something your new Sunday pal told you? Something I know for myself. And does God answer? Sometimes I think I hear him, David said. He reached into his pocket and touched the shotgun shell with the tips of his fingers. And once I know I did. I asked him to let Brian be all right. After Dad took me to the hospital, I went to the Bear Street Woods and climbed to the platform me and Bri made in a tree there and asked God to let him be all right. I said that if he did that, I'd kind of give him an IOU. Do you know what I mean? Yes, David, I know what an IOU is. And has he collected on it, this God of yours? Not yet, but when I got up to climb back down the tree, God told me to put my excused early pass on a nail that was sticking out of the bark up there. It was like he wanted me to turn it in, only to him instead of Mrs. Hardy in the office. And something else. He wanted me to find out as much as I could about him, what he is, what he wants, what he does, and what he won't do. I didn't exactly hear that in words, but I heard the name of the man he wanted me to go to, Reverend Martin. That's why I go to the Methodist Church. I don't think the brand name matters much to God, though. He just said to do church for my heart and spirit, and Reverend Martin for my mind. I didn't even know who Reverend Martin was at first. But you did, Ellie Carver said. She spoke in the soft, soothing voice of a person who suddenly understands that the person she's talking with is having mental problems. Jean Martin has come to the house 2 or 3 years in a row to collect for African relief. Really? I didn't see him. I guess I must have been in school when he came. Nonsense, his mother said, now in tones of absolute finality. He would have come around near Christmas, so you wouldn't have been in school. Now, listen to me, David, very carefully. When the stuff with Brian happened, you must have, thought you needed outside help, and your subconscious dredged up the only name it knew. The God you heard in your moment of bereavement was your subconscious mind, looking for answers. She turned to Ralph and spread her hands. The obsessive Bible reading was bad enough, but this... Why don't you tell me about this praying business? Because it looked private, he shrugged, not meeting her eyes. And it wasn't hurting anybody. Oh, no, praying is great. Without it, the thumbscrews and the Iron Maiden probably never would have been invented. This was a voice David had heard before, a nervous, hectoring voice that his mother adopted when she was trying to keep from breaking down completely. It was the way she'd spoken to him and his dad when Brian had been in the hospital. She had gone on in that vein for a week or so, even after Brian came around. David's father turned away from her, stuffing his hands in his pockets and looking nervously down at the floor. That seemed to make her more furious than ever. She swung back to David, mouth working, eyes shiny with new tears. What kind of deal did he make with you, this wonderful God? Was it like one of the baseball card trades you do with your buds? Did he say, hey, I'll trade you this neat Brian Ross 84 for this Kirsty Carver 88? Was it like that? Or more like, lady, he's your boy, and I don't mean to interfere, but why don't you give it a rest? I guess you lost your little girl. I lost my husband. We've all had a tough day. It was the woman who had shot at the cop. She was sitting on the end of the bunk. Her black hair hung against her cheeks like limp wings, but did not obscure her face. She looked shocked and stricken and tired. Most of all, tired. David couldn't remember ever having seen such a weary pair of eyes. He thought for a moment that his mother would turn her rage on the dark-haired woman. It wouldn't have surprised him. She sometimes went nuclear with total strangers. He remembered once when he'd been about 6, she'd flamed a political candidate trolling for votes outside their neighborhood supermarket. The guy had made the tactical mistake of trying to hand her a leaflet when she had an armload of groceries and was late for an appointment. She had turned on him like some small biting animal, asking him who he thought he was, what he thought he stood for, what his position was on the trade deficit. Had he ever smoked pot? Had he ever in his life converted the 6-10 split? Did he support a woman's right to choose? On that last one, the guy had been emphatic. He did support a woman's right to choose. He told Ellen Carver proudly. Good, great, because I choose right now to tell you to get the holy hell out of my face, she'd screamed, and that was when the guy had simply turned tail and fled. David hadn't blamed him either, but something in the dark-haired woman's face, parentheses, Mary, he thought her name is Mary, close parentheses, changed his mother's mind, if blowing up had indeed been on it. She focused on David again instead. So, any word from the big G on how we're supposed to get out of this? You're on your knees long enough. There must have been some sort of message. Ralph turned back to her. Quit riding him, he growled. Just quit it. Do you think you're the only one who's hurting? She gave him a look which was perilously close to contempt, then looked back at David again. Well? No, he said, no message. Someone's coming, Mary said sharply. There was a window behind her bunk. She stood on the bunk and tried to look out. Shit. Bars and frosted glass with damn chicken wire in it. But I hear it, I do. David heard it too, an approaching motor. Suddenly it revved up, blatting at full power. The sound was accompanied by a scream of tires. He looked around at the old man. The old man shrugged and raised his hands, palms up. David heard what might have been a yell of pain, and then another scream. Human, this time. It would be better to think it had been a scream of wind, caught in a gutter or a downspout, but he thought it had almost certainly been human. What the hell? Ralph said. Jesus, someone's screaming his head off. Is it the cop, do you think? Gosh, I hope so, Mary cried fiercely. Still standing on the bunk and peering at the useless window. I hope someone's pulling the son of a bitch's lungs right out of his chest. She looked around at them. Her eyes were still tired, but now they looked wild as well. It could be help. Have you thought of that? It could be help. The engine, not too close, but by no means distant, revved. The tires screamed again, screamed the way they did in the movies and on TV, but hardly ever in real life. Then there was a crunching sound, wood, metal, maybe both. A brief honk, as if someone had inadvertently struck the car's horn. A coyote howl rose, wavering and glassy. It was joined by another, and another, and another. They seemed to be mocking the dark-haired woman's idea of help. Now the motor was approaching, rumbling at a sedate level just above an idle. The man with the white hair was sitting at the foot of the cell's bunk, his hands pressed together, finger to finger, between his thighs. He talked without raising his eyes from his hands. Don't get your hopes up. His voice sounded as cracked and dusty as the salt flats west and north of here. Ain't nobody but him. I recognized the sound of the motor. I refuse to believe that, Ellie Carver said flatly. Refuse all you want, the old man said. Don't matter. I was on the committee that approved the money for a new town cruiser. Just before I finished my term and retired from politics, that was. I went over to Carson City last November with Collie and Dick, and we bought it at a DEA auction, that very car. I had my head under the hood before we bid on her and drove her halfway home, at speeds varying from 65 to 110. 110. I recognize her all right. It's Arn. And as David turned to look at the old man, the still, small voice, the one he had first heard in Brian's hospital room, spoke to him. As usual, its arrival came pretty much as a surprise, and the two words it spoke made no immediate sense. The soap. He heard the words as clearly as he had heard "You're praying already," while he'd been sitting in the Viet Cong lookout with his eyes closed. The soap. He looked into the left rear corner of the cell he was sharing with old Mr. Whitehair. There was a toilet with no seat. Beside it was an ancient, rust-stained porcelain sink. Sitting beside the right-hand spigot was a green bar of what could only be Irish Spring soap. Outside, the engine sound of the Desperation police cruiser grew fatter and closer. A little farther off, the coyotes howled. To David, that howling had begun to sound like the laughter of lunatics after the keepers had decamped the asylum. Chapter 5, Section 4. The Carver family had been too distraught and too focused on their captor to notice the dead dog hung from the Welcome to Town sign. But John Marinville was a trained noticer, and in truth the dog was now hard to miss. Since the Carvers had passed this way, the buzzards had found it. They sat on the ground below the carcass, the ugliest birds Johnny had ever seen, one pulling an old ship's tail, the other gnawing at one of his dangling feet. The body swung back and forth on the rope twisted around its neck. Johnny made a sound of disgust. Buzzards, the cop said. Gosh, aren't they something? His voice had thickened a great deal. He had sneezed twice more on the ride in from town, and the second time there had been teeth in the blood he sprayed out of his mouth. Johnny didn't know what was happening to him, and didn't care. He only wished it would hurry up. I'll tell you something about buzzards, the cop continued. They wake to sleep and take their waking slow. They learn by going where they have to go. Wouldn't you agree, mon capitaine? A lunatic cop who quoted poetry. How smart. Whatever you say, officer. He had no intention of antagonizing the cop again, if he could help it. The guy seemed to be self-destructing, and Johnny wanted to be around when the process was over. They rolled past the dead dog and the grisly skin-looking things dining on it. What about the coyotes, Johnny? What was up with them? But he wouldn't let himself think about the coyotes, lined up along both sides of the road at neat intervals like an honor guard, or of how they had peeled off like the Blue Angels as soon as the cruiser passed, running back into the desert as if their heads were on fire and their asses were catching. They fart, you know, the cop said in his blood-soaked voice. Buzzards fart. No, I didn't know that. Yes, sir, only birds that do. I tell you so you can put it in your book, Chapter 16 of Travels with Harley. Johnny thought the putative title of his book had never sounded so quintessentially stupid. They were now passing a trailer park. Johnny saw a sign in front of one, rusty roof sagging double wide, which read, I'm a gun-totin', Snapple-drinking, Bible-reading, Clinton-bashing son of a bitch. Never mind the dog, beware of the owner. Welcome to country music hell, Johnny thought. The cruiser rolled past a mining company building. There were quite a few cars and pickups in the parking lot, which struck Johnny as peculiar. It was past quitting time now, and not by a little. Why weren't these cars in their own driveways or down in front of the local watering hole? Yep, the cop said. He lifted one hand as if to frame a picture. I can see it now. Chapter 16. The Farting Buzzards of Desperation. Sounds like a damn Edgar Rice Burroughs novel, doesn't it? Burroughs was a better writer than you, though, and do you know why? Because he was a hack without pretensions, one with priorities. Tell the story, do the work, give people something they can enjoy without feeling too stupid, and stay out of the gossip columns. Where are you taking me? Johnny asked, striving for a neutral tone. Jail, the big cop said in his stuffy, liquid voice, where anything you bray will be abused against you in a sort of caw. He leaned forward, wincing at the pain in his back, where the cop had kicked him. You need help, he said. He tried to keep his voice non-accusatory, even gentle. Do you know that, officer? You're the one who needs help, the cop replied. Spiritual, physical, and editorial tack. But no help is going to come, Big John. You've eaten your last literary lunch and fucked your last culture cunt. You are on your own in the wilderness, and this is going to be the longest 40 days and 40 nights of your entire useless life. The words rang in his head like the peal of some sickly bell. Johnny closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. They were in the town proper now, passing Gale's Beauty Bar on one side and True Value Hardware on the other. There was nobody on the sidewalks, absolutely nobody. He'd never seen a small western town that was actually bustling, but this was ridiculous. No one at all. As they passed the Kanoko station, he saw a guy in the office, rocked back in his chair with his feet up on the desk, but that was it, except up ahead. A pair of animals went trotting lazily across what appeared to be the town's only intersection. Moving on a diagonal beneath the blinker light, Johnny tried to tell himself they were dogs, but they weren't dogs, they were coyotes. It's not all the cop, Johnny, don't you think it is? Something not normal is going on here. Something very much not normal. As they reached the intersection, the cop slammed on the brakes. Johnny, not expecting it, was thrown forward into the mesh between the front and back seats. He hit his nose and bellowed with surprised pain. The cop took no notice of him. Billy Rancourt, he cried, delighted. Damn, that's Billy Rancourt. I wondered where he got off to. Drunk in the basement of the Broken Drum. I bet you that's where he was. Dollars to donuts. Big balls, Billy. Damn if it's not. My nose, Johnny cried. It had started bleeding again, and he once more sounded like a human foghorn. Oh, Christ, it hurts. Shut up, you baby, the cop said. Gosh, aren't you spleeny? He backed up a little, then turned the cruiser so it was facing west on the cross street. He cranked his window down and poked his head out. The nape of his neck was now the color of age-darkened bricks, badly blistered, crisscrossed with cracks. Bright lines of blood filled some of these. Billy! The cop yelled. Yo, you Billy Rancourt. Hey, you old cuss. The western end of Desperation appeared to be a residential section, dusty and dispirited, but maybe a cut or two above the trailer park. Through his watering eyes, Johnny saw a man in blue jeans and a cowboy hat standing in the center of the street. He'd been looking at two bicycles which sat there upside down with their wheels sticking up. There had been three, but the smallest, a candy pink little girl's bike, had fallen over in the strengthening wind. The wheels of the other two spun madly. Now this fellow looked up, saw the cruiser, waved hesitantly, then started toward them. The cop pulled his large square head back in. He turned to look at Johnny, who understood at once that the guy out there couldn't have gotten a good look at this particular officer of the law. If he had, he would be running in the other direction right now. The cop's mouth had the sunken, infirm look of lips with no teeth to back them up, and blood ran from the corners in little streams. One of his eyes was a cauldron of gore, except for an occasional gray flash from its swimming depths. It could have been a plucked socket. A shiny mat of blood covered the top half of his khaki shirt. That's Billy Rancourt, he confided happily. He cuts my hair. I've been looking for him. He lowered his voice to that register at which confidences are imparted and added he drinks a bit. Then he faced front, dropped the transmission into drive, and floored the accelerator. The rumbling engine howled, the tires squalled. Johnny was thrown backward, yelling with surprise. The cruiser shot forward. Johnny reached out, hooked his fingers through the mesh, and hauled himself back to a sitting position. He saw the man in the jeans and cowboy hat, big boy's Billy Rancourt, just standing there in the street 10 feet or so in front of the bikes, frozen, watching them come. He seemed to swell in the windshield as the cruiser ran at him. It was like watching some crazy camera trick. No! Johnny shrieked, beating his left hand at the mesh behind the cop's head. No, don't! Mister, look out! At the last minute, Billy Rancourt understood and tried to run. He broke to his right toward a ramshackle house, squatting tiredly behind a picket fence, but it was too little and too late. He yelled, then there was a crump as the cruiser struck him hard enough to make the frame shudder. Blood spattered the picket fence. There was a double thud from beneath the car as the wheels ran over the fallen man, and then the cruiser hit the fence and knocked it down. The big cop jammed on the brakes, bringing the cruiser to a stop in the bald dirt dooryard of the ramshackle house. Johnny was thrown forward into the mesh again, but this time he managed to get his arm up and his head down, protecting his nose. Bill, you bugger! The cop cried happily. Tak Allah! Tak and la! Billy Rancourt screamed. Johnny turned in the back seat of the cruiser and saw him crawling as fast as he could toward the north side of the street. That wasn't very fast. He was trailing a broken leg. There were tread marks running across the back of his shirt and the set of his jeans. His cowboy hat was sitting on the pavement, now turned upside down, like the bicycles. Billy Rancourt bumped it with one knee, knocking it aslant, and blood poured out over the brim like water. More blood was gushing from his split skull and broken face. He was badly hurt, but although he had been struck amidships and then run over, he didn't appear even close to dead. That didn't surprise Johnny much. Most times it took a lot to kill a man. He had seen it again and again in Vietnam. Guys alive with half their heads blown off. Guys alive with their guts piled in their laps and drawing flies. Guys alive with their jugulars spouting through their dirty fingers. People usually died hard. That was the horror of it. Yeehaw! The cop yelled and dropped the cruiser's transmission into reverse. The tires screamed and smoked across the sidewalk, bounced back into the street, and ran over Billy Rancourt's cowboy hat. The cruiser's back deck hit one of the bikes. It made a hell of a bang, cracked the rear window, then flew out of sight for a moment before coming down in front. Johnny had time to see that Billy Rancourt had stopped crawling, that he was looking back over his shoulder at them, that his blood-streaked broken nose face wore an expression of unspeakable resignation. He can't even be 30, Johnny thought. And then the man was born under the reversing car. It lurched over the body and came to a stop, idling against the far curb. The cop hit the horn with the point of his elbow, making it blip briefly, and he turned to face forward again. Ahead of the cruiser's nose, Billy Rancourt lay face down in a huge splat of blood. One of his feet twitched, then stopped. "Whoa," the cop said. "What a damn mess, huh?" "Yeah, you killed him," Johnny said. Suddenly he didn't care anymore about playing this guy up, outlasting him. He didn't care about the book or his Harley or where Steve Ames might be. Maybe later, if there was a later, he would care about some of those things, but not now. Now, in his shock and dismay, an earlier draft of himself had come out from someplace inside, a pre-edited version of Johnny Marinville, who didn't give a shit about the Pulitzer Prize or the National Book Award or fucking actresses with or without emeralds. Ran him over in the street like a damn rabbit. Brave boy. The cop turned, gave him a considering look with his one good eye, then turned back to face the windshield again. "I have taught thee in the way of wisdom," he said. "I have led thee in right paths. When thou goest, thy steps shall not be straitened, and when thou runnest, thou shalt not stumble." That's from the Book of Adverbs, John. But I think old Billy stumbled. Yes, I do. He was always a glue foot. I think that was his basic problem. Johnny opened his mouth. For one of the few times in his entire life, nothing came out. Maybe that was just as well. Take fast hold of instruction. Let her not go. Keep her, for she is thy life. That's a little advice you could afford to take, Mr. Marinville, sir. Excuse me a minute. He got out and walked to the dead man in the street, his boots seeming to shimmer as the strengthening wind blew sand across them. There was a large, bloody patch on the seat of his uniform pants now, and when he bent to pick up the late Billy Rancourt, Johnny saw more blood oozing out through the ripped seams under the cop's arms. It was as if he were literally sweating blood. Maybe so, probably so. I think he's on the verge of crashing and bleeding out, the way hemophiliacs sometimes do. If he wasn't so Christing big, he'd probably be dead already. You know what you have to do, don't you? Yes, of course he did. He had a bad temper, a horrible temper, and it seemed that not even getting the shit kicked out of him by a homicidal maniac had changed that. What he had to do now was keep that temper of his under control. No more cracks like calling the cop a brave boy just now. That had earned him a look Johnny hadn't liked at all, a dangerous look. The cop carried Billy Rancourt's body across the street, stepping between the two fallen bikes and past the one with its wheels still whirring and its spokes shining in the evening light. He tromped over the knocked-down piece of picket fence, climbed the steps of the house behind it, and shifted his burdens so he could try the door. It opened with no trouble. Johnny wasn't surprised. He supposed that people out here did not, as a rule, bother locking their doors. He'll have to kill the people inside, he thought. That's pretty much automatic. But the cop only bent, offloaded his burden, then backed out onto the porch's little stoop again. He closed the door and then wiped his hands above it, leaving smears of blood on the lintel. He was so tall, he didn't even have to reach to do this. The gesture gave Johnny a deep chill. It was like something out of the book of Exodus, instructions for the angel of death to pass on by. Except this man was the angel of death, the destroyer. The cop walked back to the cruiser, got in, and drove sedately back toward the intersection. "Why'd you take him into there?" Johnny asked. "What did you want me to do?" the cop asked. His voice was thicker than ever. Now he seemed almost to be gargling his words. "Leave him for the buzzards. I'm ashamed of you, mon Capitan. You've been living so long with so-called civilized folk that you're starting to think like them." "The dog, a man is not a dog," the cop said in a prim, lecturely voice. He turned right at the intersection, then almost immediately hung a left, turning into a parking lot next to the town's municipal building. He killed the engine, got out, and opened the right-hand rear door. That at least spared Johnny the pain and effort of sliding his banged-up body out past the sagging driver's seat. A chicken is not a chicken dinner, and a man is not a dog, Johnny. Not even a man like you. Come on, get out, alley-zoot. Johnny got out. He was very aware of the silence, the sounds he could hear, wind, the spick-spack of alkali hitting the brick side of the municipal building, a monotonous squeaking sound from somewhere nearby, only emphasized that silence, turned it into something like a dome. He stretched, wincing at the pain in his back and leg, but needing to do something for the rest of his muscles, which were badly cramped. Then he forced himself to look up into the ruin of the cop's face. The man's height was intimidating, somehow disorienting. It wasn't just that at 6'3", Johnny was used to looking down into people's faces instead of up. It was the amount of the height differential. Not an inch or two, but at least 4. Then there was the breadth of the man, the sheer breadth. He didn't just stand, he loomed. "Why didn't you kill me like you did that guy back there, Billy? Or does it even make any sense to ask? Are you beyond why?" "Oh, shit, we're all beyond why, you know that," the cop said, exposing bloody teeth in a smile Johnny could have done without. "The important thing is, listen closely, I could let you go. Would you like that? You must have at least 2 more stupid, pointless books left in your head, maybe as many as half a dozen. You can write a few before that thunderclap coronary that's waiting for you up the road finally takes you off. And I'm sure that given time you could put this interlude behind you, and once more convince yourself that what you are doing somehow justifies your existence. Would you like that, Johnny? Would you like me to let you go free?" Aaron go bragh. B-R-A-G-H. Johnny thought for no reason at all, and for one nightmarish moment felt he would laugh. Then the urge was gone. He nodded yes, I'd like that very much. Free, like a bird out of a cage. The cop flapped his arms to demonstrate, and Johnny saw that the bloody patches under his arms had spread. His uniform shirt was now stained crimson along the torn side seams, almost all the way down to his belt line. Yes, not that he believed his new playmate had the slightest intention in the world of letting him free. Oh no. But said playmate was shortly going to be nothing but blood sausage held together by the casing of his uniform. And if he could just remain whole and functional himself until that happened. Alright, here's the deal, big shot. Suck my cock. Do that and I'll let you go. Straight trade. He unzipped his fly and pulled down the elastic front of his shorts. Something that looked like a dead white snake fell out. Johnny observed the thin stream of blood drizzling from it without surprise. The cop was bleeding from every other orifice, wasn't he? Speaking in the literary sense, the cop said, grinning, this particular blowjob is going to be a little more Anne Rice than Armistead Maupin. I suggest you follow Queen Victoria's advice. Close your eyes and think of strawberry shortcake. Johnny Marinville looked at the maniac's prick, then up at the maniac's grinning face, then back at his prick again. He didn't know what the cop expected. Screams, revulsion, tears, melodramatic pleading. But he had a clear sense that he wasn't feeling what the cop wanted him to feel, what the cop probably thought he was feeling. You don't seem to understand that I've seen a few worse things in my life than a cock dripping blood. Not just in Vietnam, either. He realized that the anger was creeping up on him again, threatening to take him over. Oh, shit. Of course it was. Anger had always been his primary addiction, not whiskey or coke or lewds. Plain old rage. It didn't have anything to do with what the cop had taken out of his pants. And that might be what the guy didn't understand. It wasn't a sex issue. The thing was, Johnny Marinville had never liked anything stuck in his face. I'll get down on my knees in front of you if you want, he said. And although his voice was mild, something in the cop's eyes changed. Something in the cop's face changed. Really changed. For the first time, it blanked out somehow. Except for the good eye, which narrowed suspiciously. Why are you looking at me that way? What in the hell gives you the right to look at me that way? Tack. Never mind how I'm looking at you. Just hear me out, motherfucker. 3 seconds after I put that trouser rat of yours into my mouth, it's going to be lying on the pavement. You got that? Tack. He spat this last word up into the cop's face, standing on tiptoe to do it. And for a moment, the big man looked more than surprised. He looked shocked. Then the expression tightened into a cramp of rage. And he shoved Johnny away from him so hard that for a moment he felt as if he were flying. He hit the side of the building, saw stars as the back of his head connected with rough brick, bounced back, then went sprawling when his feet tangled together. New places hurt and old places howled. But the expression he had seen on the cop's face made it all worthwhile. He looked up to see if it was still there, wanting to sample it again like a bee sampling the sweetheart of a flower, and his heart staggered in his chest. The cop's face had tautened. The skin on it now looked like makeup or a thin coat of paint. Unreal. Even the blood-filled eye looked unreal. It was as if there was another face beneath the one Johnny could see, pushing at the overlying flesh, trying to get out. The cop's good eye fixed on him for a moment, and then his head lifted. He pointed at the sky with all 5 fingers of his left hand. "Tak Allah," he said in his guttural, gargling voice. "Timo. Candela. On." There was a flapping sound like clothes on a line, and a shadow fell over Johnny's face. There was a harsh cry, not quite a caw, and then something with Scabrous, flapping wings dropped on him, its crooked claws gripping his shoulders and folding themselves into the fabric of his shirt, its beak digging into his scalp as it uttered its inhuman cry again. It was the smell that told Johnny what it was, a smell like meat gone feverish with rot. Its huge, unkempt wings flapped against the sides of his face as it solidified its position, driving that stench into his mouth and nose, jamming it in, making him gag. He saw the shepherd on its rope, swinging, as the peeled-looking bald things pulled at its tail and feet with their beaks. Now, one of them was roosting on him, one which had apparently never heard that buzzards were fundamental cowards that only attacked dead things, and its beak was plowing his scalp in furrows, bringing blood. "Get it off!" he screamed, completely unnerved. He tried to grab the wide, beating wings, but got only 2 fistfuls of feathers. Nor could he see. He was afraid that if he opened his eyes, the buzzard would shift its position and peck them out. "Jesus, please get it off me." "Are you going to look at me properly if I do?" the cop asked. "No more insolence, no more disrespect." No more. He would have promised anything. Whatever had leaped out of him and spoken against the cop was gone now. The bird had plucked it out like a worm from an ear of corn. "You promise?" The bird, flapping and squalling and pulling, smelling like green meat and exploded guts, on him, eating him alive. Yes, I promise." "Fuck you," the cop said calmly. "Fuck you. Ospa. And fuck your promise. Take care of it yourself, or die." Eyes squeezed to slits. Kneeling, head lowered, Johnny gripped blindly for the bird, caught its wings where they joined its body, and tore it off his head. It spasmed wildly in the air above him, shitting white streams that the wind pulled away in banners, uttering its rough cry. Only there was pain in it now. In parentheses. Its head whipping from side to side, sobbing. Mostly what he felt was revulsion. Johnny ripped one of the wings off and threw the buzzard against the wall. It stared at him with eyes as black as tar, its blood-stained beak popping open and then snapping closed with liquid little clicks. "That's my blood, you bastard," Johnny thought. He dropped the wing he'd torn off the bird and got to his feet. The buzzard tried to lurch away from him, flapping its one good wing like an oar, stirring up dust and feathers. It went in the direction of the Desperation police cruiser, but before it managed more than 5 feet, Johnny brought one motorcycle boot down on it, snapping its back. The bird's scaly legs splayed out to either side, as if it were trying to do the split. Johnny put his hands over his eyes, convinced for one moment that his mind was going to snap just as the bird's back had snapped. "Not bad," the cop said. "You got him, pard. Now turn around." "No," he stood, trembling all over, hands to his face. "Turn around." There was no denying the voice. He turned and saw the cop pointing up, once again with all 5 splayed fingers. Johnny raised his head and saw more buzzards, 2 dozen at least, sitting in a line along the north side of the parking lot, looking down at them. "Want me to call them?" the cop asked in a deceptively gentle tone of voice. "I can, you know. Birds are a hobby of mine. They'll eat you alive, if that's what I want." No. He looked back at the cop and was relieved to see his fly was zipped again. There was a blood stain spreading across the front of his pants, though. "No, don't." "What's the magic word, Johnny?" For a moment, a horrible moment, he had no idea what the cop wanted him to say. Then it came to him. "Please?" "Are you ready to be reasonable?" Yes." "I wonder about that," the cop said. He seemed to be speaking to himself. "I just wonder." Johnny stood looking at him, saying nothing. The anger was gone. Everything felt gone, replaced by a kind of deep numbness. "That boy," the cop said, looking up toward the 2nd floor of the municipal building, where there were a number of opaque windows with bars outside them. "That boy troubles my mind. I wonder if I shouldn't talk to you about him. Perhaps you could counsel me." The cop folded his arms against his body, raised his hands, and began to tap his fingers lightly against his collarbones, much as he'd tapped them against the steering wheel earlier. He stared at Johnny as he did this. "Or maybe I should just kill you, Johnny. Maybe it would be the best thing. Once you're dead, they might award you that Nobel you've always lusted after. What do you think?" The cop raised his head to the buzzard-line roofline of the municipal building and began to laugh. They cried harsh, cawing sounds back down at him, and Johnny was not able to stifle the thought which came to him then. It was horrible because it was so convincing. They are laughing with him because it's not his joke, it's their joke. A gust of air snapped across the parking lot, making Johnny stagger on his feet, blowing the torn-off buzzard wing across the pavement like a feather duster. The light was fading out of the day, fading too fast. He looked to the west and saw that rising dust had blurred the mountains in that direction and might soon erase them completely. The sun was still above the dust, but wouldn't be for long. It was a windstorm headed their way. Chapter 5, Section 5. The 5 people in the holding cells, the Carvers, Mary Jackson, and old Mr. Whitehair, listened to the man screaming and the sounds that accompanied the screams, harsh bird cries and flapping wings. At last they stopped. David hoped no one else was dead down there, but when you got right to it, what were the chances? "What'd you say his name was?" Mary asked. "Kali Entragian," the old man said. He sounded as if listening to the screams had pretty much tired him out. "Kali's short for Collier. He come here from one of those mining towns in Wyoming. 15, 16 years ago. A little more than a teenager then he was. Wanted police work, couldn't get it. Went to work for the Diablo company, up to the pit instead. That was around the time Diablo was getting ready to pack up and go home. Kai was part of the closed down crew, as I remember. He told Peter and me the mine was open, Mary said. The old man shook his head in what might have been weariness or exasperation. There's some thinks old China ain't played out, but they're wrong. It's true they've been bustling around up there again, but they won't take Doodley squad out of it. Just lose their investors' money and then shut her down. Won't be nobody any happier about it than Jim Reed either. He's tired of barroom fights. All of us will be glad when they leave old China alone again. It's haunted, that's what the ignorant folks around these parts think. He paused. I'm one of them. Who's Jim Reed? Ralph asked. Town safety officer, what you'd call a chief of police in a bigger burg. But there's only 200 people or so in Desperation these days. Jim had 2 full-time deputies, Dave Pearson and Callie. Nobody expected Callie to stay around after Diablo folded, but he did. He wasn't married, and he had workman's comp. He floated along for a while, odd jobbing, and eventually Jim started to throw work his way. He was good enough so that the town officers took Jim's recommendation and hired him on full-time in 91. 3 guys seems like a lot of law for a town this small, Ralph said. I reckon. But we got some money from Washington Rural Law Enforcement Act. Plus, we landed a contract with Sedalia County to keep school on the unincorporated lands around here. Pop the speeders, jug the drunks, all such as that. More coyote wails from outside. They sounded shimmery in the rising wind. Mary asked, what did he get workman's comp for? Some kind of mental problem? No. Pickup he was riding in turned turtle on its way down into the pit yonder, the China. Just before the Diablo people gave it up as a bad job this was. Blew out his knee. Boy was fit enough after, but he had a limp, no question about that. Then it's not him, Mary said flatly. The old man looked at her, shaggy eyebrows raised. The man who killed my husband does not limp. No, the old man agreed. He spoke with a weird kind of serenity. No, he don't, but it's Collie, all right. I've been seeing him most every day for 15 years. Have bought him drinks in the Broken Drum, and had him buy me a few in return over at Bud Suds. He was the one came to the clinic, took pictures, and dusted for prints the time those fellas broke in. Probably looking for drugs they were, but I don't know. They never caught him. Are you a doctor, mister? David asked. Vet, the old man said. Tom Billingsley is my name. He held out a big, worn hand that shook a little. David took it gingerly. Downstairs, a door smashed open. Here we are, Big Jim, the cop said. His voice rolled jovially up the stairs. Your room awaits. Room? Hell, regular efficiency apartment. Up you go. We forgot the word processor, but we left you some great walls and a few little hallmark sentiments like suck my cock and I fucked your sister to get you started. Tom Billingsley glanced toward the door, which gave upon the stairs, then looked back at David. He spoke loud enough for the others to hear, but it was David he looked at. David, he seemed to want to tell. Tell you something else, he said. He's bigger. What do you mean? But David thought he knew. What I said. Kai was never a midget, stood about 6'4", I'd judge, and probably weighed about 230, but now... He glanced toward the doorway to the stairs again. toward the sound of approaching, clumping footsteps. 2 sets. Then he looked back at David. Now I'd say he's at least 3 inches more than that, wouldn't you? And maybe 60 pounds heavier. That's crazy, Ellen cried. Absolutely nuts. Yes, the white-haired vet agreed, but it's true. The door of the stairs flew all the way open, and a man with a bloody face and shoulder-length gray hair, it was also streaked and clumped with blood, flew into the room. He didn't cross it with Mary Jackson's poetic grace, but stumbled at the halfway point and fell to his knees, holding his hands out in front of him to keep from crashing into the desk. The man who followed him through the door was the man who had brought them all to this place. And yet he wasn't. He was a kind of blood gorgon, a creature who appeared to be disintegrating before their very eyes. He surveyed them from the melting ramparts of his face, and his mouth spread in a wide, lip-splitting grin. "Look at us," he said in a thick, sentimental voice. "Look at us, would you? Gosh, just one big happy family."